Do you remember the gritty streets of New York in the early 70s? The screeching tires, the relentless chase beneath the elevated train tracks, and a detective so obsessed with justice that he would break every rule to catch his man? In 1971, a film burst onto the screen that would forever change the landscape of crime cinema. The French Connection wasn't just another cop movie. It was raw, unfiltered, and brutally realistic, directed by William Friedkin. This masterpiece captured the essence of urban decay and the desperate war against drugs that defined an era. The film didn't just entertain. It grabbed audiences by the collar and threw them into the backseat of one of cinema's most legendary car chases. With 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor, The French Connection became an instant classic. It launched careers, redefined the thriller genre, and proved that Hollywood could create art that was both commercially successful and critically acclaimed. At its heart was Gene Hackman as Jimmy Popeye Doyle, the hot-headed detective whose obsession knew no bounds. Alongside him stood Roy Scheider as the level-headed Buddy Russo, and across the ocean, the elegant Fernando Rey as the untouchable French drug lord Alain Charnier. The supporting cast was equally compelling. Tony Lo Bianco brought authenticity as the small-time dealer Sal Boca. Marcel Bozzuffi chilled audiences as the cold-blooded assassin Pierre Nicoli. And in a fascinating twist of reality, meeting fiction, Eddie Egan, the real-life detective who inspired Popeye Doyle, appeared in the film as Doyle's superior. But that was over 50 years ago. Half a century has passed since those unforgettable faces first appeared on screen. The cameras stopped rolling, the lights dimmed, and life, with all its unpredictable twists and turns, continued its relentless march forward. What happened to these actors after the spotlight faded? Did they ride the wave of success to even greater heights? Or did they face the harsh reality that fame is often fleeting? Some found enduring glory. Others battled personal demons. A few vanished from the public eye entirely. And tragically, several have now departed this world, leaving behind only their immortal performances and the memories they created. Join us as we travel back in time to 1971. Then journey forward to 2025, tracing the remarkable, sometimes heartbreaking, always fascinating paths these talented individuals walked after the French Connection wrapped. Remember that moment when Popeye Doyle stood on that freezing platform, his breath visible in the winter air, watching the train disappear into the distance? That was Gene Hackman at 41, delivering the performance that would define his career. Born in 1,930 inches San Bernardino, California, Eugene Allen Hackman had already spent over a decade grinding through small roles before the French Connection changed everything. He wasn't classically handsome by Hollywood standards. His face was rugged, weathered, real, and that authenticity became his greatest asset. Before Popeye Doyle, Hackman had earned recognition in Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, receiving his first Oscar nomination, but leading roles remained elusive. The French Connection was his breakthrough. Director William Friedkin saw something in Hackman that others had missed, an ability to embody working-class determination and barely controlled rage. At 41, playing the obsessive detective required physical intensity that left Hackman exhausted. The famous chase scene wasn't performed by stunt doubles. That was Hackman, gripping the wheel, racing beneath the elevated tracks at dangerous speeds. The role earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. And suddenly, at an age when many actors' careers were winding down, Gene Hackman's was just beginning. The 70s and 80s belonged to Hackman. The Conversation in 1974 showcased his range, Superman in 1978 proved he could dominate blockbusters. The French Connection 2 brought Popeye back in 1975. Hoosier. Mississippi Burning. Unforgiven, where he won his second Oscar. The list goes on. Hackman became one of Hollywood's most respected character actors, capable of playing villains and heroes with equal conviction. Today, Gene Hackman is 94 years old. He retired from acting in 2004. Walking away at the height of his powers, no scandal forced him out. No fading abilities. He simply chose to stop. Since then, he has lived quietly in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Far from Hollywood's chaos, he published several historical novels, including Wake of the Perdido Star and Escape from Andersonville, revealing yet another creative dimension. Hackman rarely gives interviews. He doesn't attend award ceremonies or reunions. He married his longtime partner, Betsy Arakawa, in 1991. And together they have built a peaceful life away from cameras. His health has remained relatively strong. Though he avoids the public eye almost entirely, the man who once embodied rage and obsession now spends his days in tranquil anonymity. Having left behind a legacy of over 80 films and 2 Academy Awards, if Popeye Doyle represented fire, then Buddy Russo was the water that kept him from burning everything down. Roy Scheider brought a calm intensity to the role, the perfect counterbalance to Hackman's explosive energy. Roy Richard Scheider was born in 1,932 inches Orange Cheddar, New Jersey. Before the French Connection, he had worked steadily in theater and television, but film success had eluded him. At 39, playing, Russo gave Scheider the visibility he desperately needed. His performance earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor, though he didn't win. But Roy Scheider understood something important. Sometimes the quieter role opens bigger doors. In 1975, 4 years after the French Connection, Scheider took on the role of Police Chief Martin Brody in Steven Spielberg's Jaws. The film became the first summer blockbuster, and suddenly Roy Scheider was a household name. His famous line, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," entered pop culture permanently. He followed Jaws with Marathon Man, Sorcerer, and All That Jazz in 1979, earning another Oscar nomination for Best Actor. The 80s brought him the lead role in the science fiction series Sequest DSV, introducing him to a new generation of fans. Scheider continued working steadily through the 90s and early 2000s. He never stopped acting, never stopped seeking interesting characters. His passion for his craft remained undimmed, even as Hollywood's tastes changed around him. Tragically, Roy Scheider was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer. He fought the disease for several years, continuing to work when his health allowed. On February 10, 2008, at the age of 75, Roy Scheider passed away at the University of Arkansas Medical Center. He left behind his wife, Brenda Seymour Scheider, and 3 children. His final years were spent surrounded by family, his dignity intact, his legacy secure. Today, when we watch The French Connection or Jaws, we see an actor who brought authenticity and quiet strength to every role. Roy Scheider never chased fame, but his talent ensured it found him anyway. And in the end, that's perhaps the greatest tribute of all. Elegant, intouchable, always one step ahead. Fernando Rey's Alain Charnier was the sophisticated opposite of Popeye Doyle's brutal determination. With his distinctive face and continental charm, Ray represented European refinement in stark contrast to New York's gritty streets. Here's a fascinating twist. Fernando Rey was actually the second choice for Alain Charnier. Director William Friedkin originally wanted Jean Gabin, but when Gabin was unavailable, he attempted to cast another French actor whose name was misunderstood over a bad phone connection. That misunderstanding led him to Fernando Rey, a Spanish actor who barely spoke English, born Fernando Casado Arambillet Veiga in 1917 Pulgada, La Coruña, Spain. Rey had already enjoyed a substantial career in European cinema before the French Connection. At 54, he brought gravitas and mystery to the role. Despite the language barrier, Rey's performance was mesmerizing. His calm demeanor and knowing smile suggested a man who always held the winning hand. What many don't realize is that Fernando Rey was a favorite actor of legendary director Luis Buñuel, appearing in several of his surrealist masterpieces, including Tristana, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, and That Obscure Object of Desire. This association gave Rey serious artistic credibility beyond commercial cinema. After the French Connection, Rey reprised his role in the French Connection 2 in 1975, facing off against Hackman once again. He continued working prolifically in European cinema. Appearing in over 200 films during his career, Fernando Rey remained active well into his 70s. He worked consistently in Spanish television and film. Beloved in his home country as a distinguished elder statesman of acting, his voice became as recognizable as his face, often used for dubbing and narration. On March 9, Fernando Rey passed away from bladder cancer in Madrid at the age of 76. Spain mourned the loss of one of its greatest actors. Today, when we watch Charnier calmly sipping wine while Popeye freezes on a stakeout, we see an actor who understood that true menace doesn't need to raise its voice. Fernando Rey brought continental sophistication to American cinema, and his portrayal of the unflappable drug lord remains one of the genre's most memorable villains. The connection between the French suppliers and American streets required a middleman, and Tony Lobianco's Sal Boca was that crucial link, a small-time operator with big-time connections. Sal represented the greed that fueled the entire deadly enterprise. Born in 1936 inches Brooklyn, New York, Anthony Lobianco grew up in the same kind of neighborhood that the French Connection depicted. That authenticity showed in every scene. At 35, playing Sal Boca gave Lobianco a significant role in a major film. Though he wasn't yet a household name, Lobianco brought nervous energy to the role. His Sal was always looking over his shoulder. Caught between ambition and fear, the character's eventual fate, a target of investigation that closes in relentlessly, was portrayed with genuine anxiety. After the French Connection, Lobianco found steady work throughout the 70s. He appeared in The 7-Ups in 1973, another gritty New York crime film. He worked extensively in television, with recurring roles and guest appearances that kept him employed for decades. In 1978, he landed the title role in the television movie Christ, the miniseries, showing his range beyond tough guy roles. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Lobianco became a familiar face on television, appearing in everything from law enforcement dramas to sitcoms. Now 88 years old, Tony Lobianco is one of the surviving cast members of the French Connection. He has largely retired from acting, though he occasionally makes appearances at film retrospectives and conventions where classic cinema is celebrated. Lobianco has been married twice and has children from both marriages. He has lived a relatively quiet life, avoiding the scandals and troubles that plagued some of his contemporaries. His career never reached superstar status, but he worked consistently for over 5 decades, which is its own kind of success. Today, Tony Lo Bianco represents the working actor, someone who showed up, did the job professionally, and built a respectable body of work. In an industry obsessed with fame, there's something admirable about that steady dedication to craft, cold, calculating, ruthless. Marcel Bozzuffi's Pierre Nicoli was the assassin who would kill without hesitation, the embodiment of the drug trade's violent reality. His sniper scene on the rooftop remains one of the film's most tension-filled moments. Born in 1,928 inches, Rennes, France, Marcel Bozzuffi was already an established actor in French cinema when he took the role of Pierre Nicoli at 43. His gaunt features and intense eyes made him perfect for playing dangerous men. In The French Connection, he brought European menace to New York streets. The famous chase sequence, where Nicoli commandeers an elevated train while Popeye pursues in a car below, showcased Bozzuffi's ability to convey threat without dialogue. His Nicoli was a professional killer. Nothing more, nothing less. After The French Connection, Bozzuffi returned to France and continued his successful career in European cinema. He appeared in Z, one of the greatest political thrillers ever made, and numerous French films throughout the 70s. He was known for playing tough guys, criminals, and authority figures with equal skill. Bozzuffi was a consummate professional, respected by directors and fellow actors. His weathered face and intensity made him invaluable for crime dramas and thrillers. He worked steadily, building a filmography of over 90 films. Tragically, Marcel Bozzuffi's career was cut short. On February 1, 1988, at the age of only 59, he died from lung cancer in Paris. His passing was mourned in French cinema circles, where he was considered a reliable and talented character actor. He left behind his wife and children, and a body of work that showcased his range and dedication. Though perhaps not a household name outside France, within European cinema, Bozzuffi was respected and valued. Today, when we watch Pierre Nicoli methodically preparing to assassinate a police officer, we see Marcel Bozzuffi at his cold, professional best. His performance added international flavor to The French Connection and reminded audiences that danger speaks many languages. His time was brief, but his impact on the film was undeniable. Bill Hickman's role as federal agent Bill Mulderig was smaller than the leads. But there's a fascinating story behind the man himself. Because Hickman wasn't primarily an actor, he was one of Hollywood's greatest stunt drivers. Born in 1,921 inches, California, William Hickman had been a stunt driver and coordinator since the 40s. Before The French Connection, he had already coordinated one of cinema's most famous car chases in Bullitt in 1968, where he actually drove the villain's Dodge Charger that Steve McQueen's Mustang pursued through San Francisco. When William Friedkin needed someone to choreograph and help film The French Connection's legendary chase sequence, Hickman was the natural choice, but Friedkin also gave him the role of Mulderig, the federal agent who clashes with Doyle throughout the investigation. At 50, Hickman brought authenticity to the role because he understood law enforcement operations. His Mulderig was skeptical. By the book, everything Popeye Doyle wasn't. After The French Connection, Hickman continued working as a stunt coordinator on major films. He coordinated stunts for the 7-Ups in 1973, which featured another spectacular chase sequence, and worked on numerous other action films throughout the 70s. Hickman represented old Hollywood, the skilled craftsman who made stars look good and audiences gasp. His work was dangerous, technically complex, and rarely received the recognition it deserved. Bill Hickman passed away on February 24 from cancer at the age of 65. His death marked the end of an era in stunt work, when much of the action was practical, real, and physically demanding. Today, with CGI dominating action sequences, Hickman's practical stunt work seems even more impressive. The French Connection's chase wasn't created in a computer. It was real cars, real speeds, real danger. And Bill Hickman was the man who made it possible. His contribution to cinema history extends far beyond his on-screen role, into the very DNA of action filmmaking itself. Here's where reality and fiction blur in the most fascinating way. Eddie Egan wasn't just playing a police inspector in The French Connection. He had been the real detective whose investigation inspired the entire story. He was the actual Popeye. Edward Egan was born in 1930 inches New York City. He joined the New York Police Department and eventually became one of the most celebrated detectives in the city's history. In 1962, Egan and his partner Sonny Russo broke up a massive heroin smuggling operation, seizing 112 pounds of heroin worth $32 million at the time. This investigation became known as the French Connection case. When the film was made, Egan served as a technical consultant, helping Gene Hackman understand the mindset of an obsessive detective. Director Friedkin then cast Egan in the film as Simonson, Doyle's superior, creating this wonderful metatextual moment where the real Popeye watches the fictional Popeye work at 41, the same age as Hackman. Egan brought absolute authenticity to his scenes. He knew exactly how these men talked, thought, and operated because he had lived it. After retiring from the NYPD, Eddie Egan pursued an acting career. He appeared in several television shows and films throughout the 70s and 80s, usually playing cops or tough guys. He had a recurring role on the television series Joe Forrester and appeared in films like Badge 373. Egan also worked as a technical consultant on various police dramas, ensuring authenticity in how law enforcement was portrayed. He enjoyed his second career. Though he never became a major star, Eddie Egan died on November 4, 1995, from cancer at the age of 65. His death was noted not just in entertainment news but in New York City papers, where he was remembered as one of the great detectives of his era. The French Connection earned Egan and his partner Sonny Russo, who also had a cameo in the film, legendary status in law enforcement. Today, police academies still study their case as an example of persistent, intelligent detective work. Eddie Egan lived two remarkable lives, one fighting crime, the other portraying it on screen. Some actors appear briefly but memorably, and André Arnault was one of those presences in The French Connection, playing Laval, one of the connections in the drug-smuggling operation. Arnault represented the international nature of the conspiracy. Born in Belgium in 1943, André Arnault was a theater-trained actor who worked primarily in European productions. His role in The French Connection was relatively small, but being part of such a significant American film raised his profile internationally. Arnault brought a certain nervous sophistication to Laval, suggesting a man caught up in something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. His scenes, though brief, added texture to the film's depiction of the drug network's complexity. After The French Connection, Arnault returned to Europe and continued working in French and Belgian theater and film. He never became a major international star, but he maintained a steady career in European productions, respected within theater circles for his stage work. Unlike some actors who chase Hollywood fame, Arnault seemed content to work in his home region, building a career based on craft rather than celebrity. He appeared in various French television series and films throughout the 70s and 80s. André Ernaut is now 81 years old. He has largely retired from acting, living quietly in Europe. Very little information about his current life is publicly available, which seems fitting for someone who always preferred the work to the spotlight. His contribution to the French Connection was small but professional. A reminder that even minor roles require skilled actors to make the story believable. Ernaut did his job well, then moved on, as so many working actors do. Another member of the international drug network, Frédéric de Pasquale, played Henri de Verreau, adding another layer to the film's complex web of criminals and conspirators. Born in France in 1931, Frédéric de Pasquale came from a family with connections to the entertainment industry. His father was a well-known figure in French theater. This background gave de Pasquale access to acting opportunities from a young age. By the time he appeared in The French Connection at 40, de Pasquale had already accumulated numerous credits in French cinema. His role as Devereaux was relatively minor, but he brought the same professionalism he applied to all his work. De Pasquale worked extensively in French cinema and television throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He appeared in crime dramas, comedies, and thrillers, showing versatility across genres. Unlike actors who specialize in one type of role, de Pasquale seemed comfortable in various contexts. He was also a familiar face on French television, appearing in popular series and made-for-TV movies. This steady television work provided financial stability and kept him in the public eye in France. Even if he never achieved international fame, Frédéric de Pasquale continued acting until the early 2000s. He passed away on May 30, at the age of 71. His death was noted in French entertainment media, where he was remembered as a reliable and talented character actor. His career exemplified the working actor's life: steady employment, professional execution, and a body of work that, while not earth-shattering, demonstrated consistent quality. The French Connection was his brush with Hollywood immortality, a brief moment in an otherwise European career. In a film dominated by men, Arlene Farber's Angie Boca provided a different perspective. As Sal Boca's wife, she wasn't just a supporting character, she was complicit in the drug operation, a willing participant in the criminal enterprise. Born in New York, Arlene Farber pursued acting with determination, studying her craft and working in theater before transitioning to film. Her role in The French Connection came early in her career. She was in her 30s, playing a woman who had chosen a dangerous path alongside her husband. Farber brought authenticity to Angie Boca. She wasn't glamorous or sympathetic. She was a working-class woman involved in crime, and Farber played her with appropriate toughness and street smarts. In a film that prided itself on realism, Farber fit perfectly. After The French Connection, Farber appeared in several other films and television shows throughout the 70s. She had guest roles on popular series and supporting parts in feature films. However, despite her talent and the prestige of having been in an Oscar-winning film, stardom eluded her. The 70s were a transitional period for women in Hollywood. Roles were often limited to girlfriend, wife, or victim. Farber, like many talented actresses of her era, found opportunities scarce. She continued working sporadically through the 80s before gradually stepping away from acting. Details about Arlene Farber's later life and current status are scarce. She appears to have left the entertainment industry and chosen privacy over continued attempts at an acting career. This isn't uncommon. Many actors eventually decide that the uncertainty and rejection inherent in the profession aren't worth the emotional toll. Whether Farber is still alive in 2025 and what she's doing remains largely unknown, she represents the countless talented performers who briefly touch greatness, then fade from view. Their contributions remembered only by film historians and dedicated fans who watch the classics again and again. Her Angie Boca remains a small but authentic part of the French Connection's tapestry. In a film dominated by men, Arlene Farber's Angie Boca provided a different perspective. As Sal Boca's wife, she wasn't just a supporting character. She was complicit in the drug operation, a willing participant in the criminal enterprise. Born in New York, Arlene Farber pursued acting with determination, studying her craft and working in theater before transitioning to film. Her role in the French Connection came early in her career. She was in her 30s, playing a woman who had chosen a dangerous path alongside her husband. Farber brought authenticity to Angie Boca. She wasn't glamorous or sympathetic. She was a working-class woman involved in crime, and Farber played her with appropriate toughness and street smarts. In a film that prided itself on realism, Farber fit perfectly. After the French Connection, Farber appeared in several other films and television shows throughout the 70s. She had guest roles on popular series and supporting parts in feature films. However, despite her talent and the prestige of having been in an Oscar-winning film, stardom eluded her. The 70s were a transitional period for women in Hollywood. Roles were often limited to girlfriend, wife, or victim. Farber, like many talented actresses of her era, found opportunities scarce. She continued working sporadically through the 80s before gradually stepping away from acting. Details about Arlene Farber's later life and current status are scarce. She appears to have left the entertainment industry and chosen privacy over continued attempts at an acting career. This isn't uncommon. Many actors eventually decide that the uncertainty and rejection inherent in the profession aren't worth the emotional toll. Whether Farber is still alive in 2025 and what she's doing remains largely unknown, she represents the countless talented performers who briefly touch greatness, then fade from view. Their contributions remembered only by film historians and dedicated fans who watch the classics again and again. Her Angie Boca remains a small but authentic part of the French Connection's tapestry, and so we reach the end of our journey. From the frozen streets of New York in 1971 to the present day of 2025, 54 years have passed since the French Connection exploded onto cinema screens, forever changing how crime films would be made. What have we learned as we trace the paths of these actors through time? We've seen triumph. Gene Hackman transformed his Oscar win into one of Hollywood's most respected careers before choosing peace over fame. Retiring to write novels in the New Mexico desert, we've witnessed the bittersweet. Roy Scheider rode his success to even greater heights with Jaws, only to have his life cut short by cancer while still working. We've discovered international connections, with Fernando Rey bringing European sophistication before returning to his beloved Spain, and Marcel Bozzuffi crafting menace before his own too early death. We've encountered the fascinating blur between fiction and reality in Eddie Egan, the real detective playing his own supervisor on screen. Living two lives equally, fully, we followed working actors like Tony Lo Bianco and Bill Hickman, who built careers on professionalism rather than stardom, finding success in consistency. And we've acknowledged those like André Ernaut, Frédéric de Pascal, and Arlene Farber, whose contributions were smaller but no less valuable, and whose later lives remind us that not everyone seeks the spotlight. Time is relentless. It doesn't care about Oscars or box office numbers. It doesn't pause for fame or bow to talent. The faces that once filled the screen have aged, weathered, or vanished entirely. Some lived long, full lives. Others were taken far too soon. Some remained in the public eye. Others chose privacy and peace. But here's what time cannot erase: the work itself. The French Connection remains as powerful today as it was in 1971. The performances haven't aged. The chase scene still thrills. Popeye Doyle's obsession still feels raw and real. Every actor in this film, from the leads to the smallest supporting role, contributed to something permanent. That's the beautiful paradox of cinema. The actors age, sicken, and eventually pass from this world. But their younger selves, captured on film, remain forever. Gene Hackman at 41, racing beneath the elevated tracks. Roy Scheider's calm presence. Fernando Rey's knowing smile. They exist in an eternal present tense. Always there, waiting to be discovered by new generations. Whether these actors found continued glory or faded from view, whether they lived to old age or departed too soon, whether they remained famous or chose obscurity, they all share one bond. They were part of something special. They helped create a film that transcended its era and became timeless. So when you watch The French Connection again, and you should, remember the humans behind the characters. Remember their struggles and triumphs, their long lives and short ones, their choices and their fates. Remember that they were real people who came together for a few months in 1971 and created magic. The lights may have dimmed, the cameras may have stopped rolling, but the legacy endures, flickering on screens around the world. Immortal and unforgettable. That's the true power of cinema. And that's the real French Connection.